All right, guys, here we are. President Trump is signing the big, beautiful bill, or as others might call it, the big, beautiful blunder. Whatever side you're on with the bill overall, the question every gun owner is asking right now is, did the congressional Republicans, especially the Senate Republicans, just squander the best opportunity we've had in nearly 100 years to repeal gun control? And the answer is yeah, kinda they did. They screwed us. Now, the bill that passed did do something nominally good on guns, and I'll get to that in a bit, but what's being signed into law is completely and utterly overshadowed by the fact that it is nowhere near what you and I have spent the last 5 weeks and really the last 5 months demanding Congress act on. Frankly, what passed is table scraps compared to the pro-gun promises that GOP lawmakers made to us on the campaign trail last year. Not good enough. In a moment, I'm going to break down for you what's in the bill, some background on what happened that led us to this point, and where we go from here. But make no mistake, this fight is not over. And if you are as upset at Republicans for failing gun owners as I am, please pick up your phone, pause this video, and call Senate Majority Leader John Thune at 202-224-2321. And then also call Speaker Mike Johnson at 202-225-2777. Please also sign your petition to nuke the NFA in the description in the pinned comment below. While you have them on the phone, tell them that the big, beautiful bill is a failure for the Second Amendment, and they must act to completely repeal the entire NFA tax scheme if they don't want to lose gun owners' support in the midterms. We're talking HPA and Short Act. These politicians must understand the seriousness of their mistake by omitting most of this in the bill. The last time the GOP threw the Second Amendment under the bus in 2018, gun owners didn't show up in the midterms, and to be fair, it wasn't for lack of trying. We did not want the Democrats to take over in 2018. But it's now up to Republican leaders to make this right before it's too late to avoid history repeating itself. They need to know that without our support, they will lose. And the only way they can earn it back is to fix this mess. Okay, so let's talk about what actually passed in this bill. According to the text, the calendar quarter following 90 days after the enactment of the big, beautiful bill, the cost of NFA tax stamps for most items will be lowered to $0. Being already at the beginning of July right now, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but my math says that 90 days brings us a few days into October of quarter 4. So the tax should then be lowered effective as of January 1, 2026. This will effectively apply to short-barreled rifles, short-barreled shotguns, suppressors, and any other weapons. Currently, those are all taxed at $200, except any other weapons, which is taxed at $5, and they will now be lowered to a tax of $0. If you're like me, not needing to pay a $200 tax is a very good thing. The Second Amendment, frankly, shouldn't be taxed at all, and that is a policy win for some, but here's the problem with that. Lowering the tax to $0 does nothing for the NFA registration requirements, which are the enforcement mechanism for administering this tax. This means you'll still need to fill out your ATF Form 1s and Form 4s. You'll still need to notify your local law enforcement of your transfer. You'll still need to be fingerprinted like a common criminal. You'll even still need to notify them when you move or transport it across state lines. And failure to do this for any one of your firearms that's registered under the NFA, or any firearms that you don't register under the NFA, could land you in jail for 10 years, $10,000 fine, or both, just like it does under current law. That's bad. There's also some argument that maybe we've opened a can of worms for Democrats to come in 3 or 4 years later and raise the tax to $10,000. Or some ungodly amount of money. Frankly, if you can lower the tax to $0, they're going to come around and say, well, we can raise it too. And that's why we really needed here today to destroy it all. Never mind the fact that the Dems have been embarrassing themselves so bad the last few weeks, lying about what these NFA provisions actually do just to scare people. We're not talking about machine guns. All these provisions just affect semi-auto firearms for the firearms. Basically just ordinary medium-sized guns. Small semi-auto guns like pistols and handguns are not regulated under the NFA at all today. Big semi-automatic guns, rifles like the AR-15, they're also not regulated under the NFA today. So why should a medium-sized semi-auto gun be treated any differently? They shouldn't. But under the NFA tax, this has turned into a gotcha game for cosmetic things like a barrel being just 1 inch too long or grips being just a little bit off. Not only does the ATF make up their own determinations for these things, but many ordinary, law-abiding gun owners have also ended up in jail for these minor distinctions. But the argument we've been making all along is that you cannot separate the tax from the registration requirements because the primary purpose of the NFA, the National Firearms Act, has always been a tax. Back in 1934, when the National Firearms Act was brought before Congress in the first place, it went through a very similar budget process to pass. Literally, it was heard in the Ways and Means Committee, the very same committee the big bill was heard in last month. Even then, the politicians knew they could not outright ban guns. They knew the only way they could effectively ban them is to use the power to tax, which, as Chief Justice John Marshall from the Founders era called it, it's the power to destroy. So the whole premise of the NFA to begin with is that it is technically a tax. All we were pushing Congress to do is repeal it the same way they enacted it in the first place. While the maniacal gun grabbers at the time may have been the first to admit their real goal was to place NFA weapons out of the reach of citizens, it's not our fault the only way they could get away with it was to nest it as the enforcement mechanism of a tax. Fast forward to this fight. When the House went to pass their version of the big bill, pro-gun Congressman Andrew Clyde jumped in on the chance to try and repeal as much of the NFA tax scheme as possible. House leaders resisted and instead only included a provision removing the tax and registration requirements for suppressors only. In other words, the meat of the Hearing Protection Act, but not the Short Act. When the bill moved over to the Senate side, something happened that I have never seen before in my entire 15 years of being a gun lobbyist. The entire Second Amendment community and the gun world came together and screamed, "That's not good enough." And to their credit, the Senate Finance Committee listened to us, expanding the NFA tax repeal provision to include SBRs, SBSs, and even AOWs. This was fantastic. If it had passed, removing the tax scheme wouldn't have deregulated these firearms completely. Believe me, if we could have, we would have. Rather, they would simply default back to being treated like every other firearm transfer under the Gun Control Act of 1968, which means your regular 4473 and NICS check would have applied, which, by the way, those should be abolished too. Unfortunately, we all knew the Senate Parliamentarian would be an obstacle for gun owners, just like she was with every other issue in the big, beautiful bill. Even Republicans in the Senate GOP leadership and that committee who put these provisions in the bill knew that she would be a problem. Frankly, for those pushing a strong bill, this unelected bureaucrat, appointed under Democrat leader Harry Reid over a decade ago, absolutely gutted the bill. Normally, I would say it's a shame that Senate Republicans didn't can her months ago in preparation for this fight. But the fact that they didn't fire her months ago means that many of them quietly wanted her to gut key issues from this bill, like guns and the Second Amendment. Throughout this process, many have called for the Parliamentarian to be fired, and she should be. But the Parliamentarian is just a scapegoat for Senate Republicans who wanted an excuse not to do the hard work of replacing her and putting these provisions in the bill. GOP leader John Thune, Senate Pro Tem Chuck Grassley, this is on you. Now let's talk about the question posed to the Parliamentarian on the full repeal of the NFA tax. The question she effectively decided behind closed doors, is it budget related? We are talking about a tax that collects between $100 million and $200 million every single year and growing. It isn't a question. It is budget related. Many other issues that got struck from the bill were clearly not budget related, and a few even got left in that weren't budget related either. So it's not a matter of the Parliamentarian just making a judgment call that didn't go our way. She made a calculated political decision to issue a ruling that was factually wrong, and Republicans let it happen. As this pertains to the passage of the bill, her incorrect decision, again made behind closed doors, not in plain view on C-SPAN, allegedly meant that to include the full version of repealing the NFA tax would have required 60 votes, and Republicans only have 53 votes max right now. In the Senate, nothing that is legislation can pass without a 60-vote threshold unless it is in the annual budget bill. That's only a 50 simple majority, 50 plus 1. But you may have heard of the so-called Byrd rule that we've been talking about everywhere the last couple of weeks, which meant that any provision that slipped into the big bill that deals with policy, not budget-related matters, would need 60 votes. Your National Association for Gun Rights contends that the Senate leaders should have put the full repeal of the NFA tax, HPA provisions, shush provisions, into the bill anyway and force the darn vote, and if necessary, push for the override of the parliamentarian's judgment. That's asking a lot, but it's been done before. A simple point of order following the vote, pointing out that this is budget-related and should be admitted to the bill under a majority vote, that could have done the trick. Now, I get it. It's like the NFL commissioner calling up the referee and ordering him to reverse the call on the field after it's already been reviewed. But let me tell you something. You don't get anything as controversial as this stuff out of the Senate without ruffling some feathers. It need not be a precedent-setting event either, simply a determination that the parliamentarian was factually incorrect on this issue and her advice should be ignored. But that didn't happen. The bill passed with the $0 tax in the Senate, so we still got that. And Congressman Clyde then went on and valiantly pushed to restore the language in the House. Unfortunately, GOP leadership in the House wasn't having any of it. Speaker Johnson, Whip Tom Emmer, and others, they just ignored it, wouldn't even consider it or bring it up to the floor for the vote because they wanted to get this thing rushed to the president's desk for the 4th of July. Now here we are. Where do we go from here? It's a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking there, but let me tell you, that was one of the biggest fights I've seen in 15 years. If money is the issue for you, enjoy the little win. When this takes effect, I know I'll load up on free tax stamps, and it's possible even that some litigation could be coming down the pipeline on what the meaning of a $0 tax actually is. And I'm not going to prognosticate how that will go, but I sure hope it goes well, and it's an interesting angle. But most importantly, what are we going to do with these scummy politicians who basically threw a bait and switch at us? We all know senators like John Cornyn, who at least ostensibly tried to be helpful during this process, were only doing it to clean skirt for passing Joe Biden's red flag gun confiscation bill in 2022. And folks like him, he's probably going to just shout this from the rooftop, saying, I got you $0, because he's battling a primary from Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton right now. Once again, the political class, they're telling gun owners what we must settle for, placating us with a $0 tax with no intention of lifting another finger on the Second Amendment until after the midterms. But as always, we here at the National Association for Gun Rights will never tell gun owners what we must settle for. That would be compromise. And frankly, there may never be a better opportunity to get these pro-gun reforms in our lifetime than with this majority that the GOP currently enjoys in the House, Senate, and White House. And that means we've still got 16 months to make it happen. And we may even have one more budget bill with a simple majority threshold for 2026. If the Senate GOP would like to avoid gun owners trashing them in the 2026 primaries and maybe even sitting out the general entirely, in other words, a repeat of 2018, they better get on the horn. Firing the parliamentarian should happen, but remember, she's the scapegoat. There's no guarantee that the next parliamentarian will rule any better. No, this is squarely on John Thune and Mike Johnson and the Senate and House leaders. They better get to work queuing up another reconciliation bill that fully and completely removes the NFA tax scheme on all of those items. Not only that, but they must also move real national constitutional carry. That's H.R. 645 by Thomas Massey. They must remove the names of the 250,000 veterans that are on the no-gun list, as well as all the Americans who've been placed on the NICS list without due process. And they must abolish the ATF, not just shift around jerseys and budgets. There are absolutely many more opportunities for Republicans to act to earn back the trust that they frankly just blew with gun owners. But you and I cannot throw in the towel yet. We have to keep the pressure on Thune and Johnson and the rest of the Republican leadership in Congress right now. So again, please pick up your phone, pause this video, and call Senate Majority Leader John Thune at 202-224-2321. And then call Speaker Mike Johnson at 202-225-2777. Tell them that the big, beautiful bill didn't live up to par. It was kind of a failure for the Second Amendment. And let them know that they must act to completely repeal the entire NFA tax scheme if they don't want to lose gun owner support in the midterms. And finally, please sign your petition to nuke the NFA in the description and the pinned comment below, because we're going to be delivering more petitions and demonstrable proof of angry voters is the only thing that gets these politicians' attention. As always, stay tuned to your National Association for Gun Rights for the latest updates on all of this stuff. Thank you for everything that you've done in this fight so far. We've got more work ahead of us, but we're going to be here fighting for you. Thank you and God bless.